let's start. Thank you. So the research I'm going to present today is on the impact of discrimination on future performance. So the basic idea is that we want to identify the presence of a certain discrimination or grading bias. And the idea is to try to see what is the effect of this discrimination on the future individual performance of students. And I'm going to provide evidence of a self-fulfilling prophecy from the Italian student population. So what we already know from the literature, and like this is the literature that I aim to develop a bit, is that there is a discrimination in grading at work in both developing and developed countries. This is provided by several studies. So this is not like a big novelty to say that there is discrimination. What we are going to see is to see if this discrimination has an impact on the future performance of students. Usually, when we talk about discrimination in grading, there is a concept that is very important. It's the concept of grading bias. Grading bias means that teachers may systematically underassess students based on some observable characteristics, such as, for example, gender or migration background. In this case, we just focus on migration background. And what this literature tries to do is to estimate this grading bias with the comparison. So the idea is to try to compare the grade given by the teacher, which is therefore by definition subjective, and you can observe the individual that is assessed, with another source of information, that is the grade given by some test, which of course are like different from the previous one. In this test, the evaluator doesn't know the identity of the student. So in this context of INVALSI seminar, I think it is quite clear the potential of INVALSI test, because INVALSI tests are, by definition, a standardized test. You want to assess a student, you don't know the identity of the student for the point of view of the evaluator. And so what we are going to do is to try to follow this approach in the Italian case, and first to try to estimate this difference. The expectation here is that the discrimination in general, and this is coming from evidence both from economic and psychological research, that discrimination can lead to self-fulfilling prophecy, also called the Pygmalion effect, which is the phenomenon such that the stereotype of somebody can affect the behavior of discriminated groups in a way that people that are discriminated will end up behaving in the direction of the stereotype. The basic idea is that, for example, talking about the school context, if I think that my competence in a given subject, let's say math, is not as good, it's not very good because I always receive very poor grades, then probably I'm going to be affected by this belief, right? Maybe I'm going to invest less in the subject and I'm not going to believe that I am good at math, right? So this has some impact on my investment decisions. What about Italy? There is some evidence also in the Italian case. A very seminal paper is by Alberto Lesina, Michela Carlana, Eliana Ferrara, and Paolo Pinotti, and they show that there is some evidence of teacher bias, and they use the comparison between teacher assigned grade and INVALSI test. And what they show, which is very interesting, is that this penalty, which in some cases can be due also to some other reasons, but they show that this penalty is associated with the stereotypes as measured by an implicit association test. An implicit association test is a test in which you can try to estimate the stereotype of a certain individual. It's a test that you do at the computer, and it tells you like what is the extent of your stereotype in a certain area. And they show that the grade penalty between the subjective and non-subjective score is associated with these stereotypes. Another very important paper by Maurice Triventi, you also find that foreign students are graded less generously by teachers than natives with comparable ability. This can be explained by some factors, but still unobserved factors can be at work, like implicit discrimination. So what I'm going to do today is to present the results of this work, in which we start from the idea that there is evidence of systematic grading bias, and we are going to show that this is the case, as in previous research. But the big question here is, what is the impact of grading bias in a specific moment of time on the performance in the future of the people that are affected by this bias? And to answer this question, I'm going to use educational data on the entire population of Italian students, and these are provided by INVALSI. This is important for many reasons. First, there is a big issue of equality of opportunity. School is a key element, a key player in ensuring equality of opportunity. You want to provide everybody with the same skills, the same opportunities, so that then they can do like whatever they like, or at least they can try. And equality of opportunity is jeopardized by some sort of background, like educational background, migration background, and also economic background. In this case, we really focus on a specific element, which is the migration one, and specifically the grading bias that can jeopardize equality of opportunity in this case. This is especially important in Italy, which has experienced an increasing share of immigrants in the last years. And this population of foreign students is even overrepresented in the student population, because usually migrants have more children. So this is a quite important part of the population, right? This is very important, especially because, as we know from educational literature, the initial period of education is really key in the decision of investment in human capital. So if you are affected by some phenomena at the beginning of your education, then this has a strong impact. And given this effect and the idea of self-fulfilling prophecy, this can really lead to future potentially long-lasting effects. This is just a simple graph by Ekman to stress the idea that what happens in the earlier period of education has really a strong impact on your future investment and the return to human capital. We're going to study what happens in the second grade of primary school. So I'm going to study if there is some bias in this specific first observed period. And this is key because the earlier, the stronger the impact, right? And as I was saying, I'm going to use data on the entire population of Italian students by INVALSI. And as we know, these have like quite a lot of information. We have information about the standardized test scores, the grade given by the teacher, so we can compute the difference between the two assessments. And also we have a lot of information about socioeconomic backgrounds, institutional variables, and a lot of other more. In general, I can distinguish between three different subpopulations. So we have native students, which of course are the majority, and then first generation and second generation foreign students. Although in this presentation, I will just distinguish between native and foreign students just for simplicity, but we can distinguish even more. And in the data set that I created merging these different cross sections of INVALSI, we consider three periods: the second grade of primary school, the fifth grade of primary school, which is therefore the second period observed, and then the eighth grade, which for those who are familiar with the Italian school system is the third year of the middle school, and in our case is the third period that I observe. Okay, this is just like to show how grades are distributed for the teacher-assigned math grade. So as we know, grades ranges from 0 to 10, although grades below 4 are extremely rare in primary school. And in general, as you see in the chart to the right, native students perform better than foreign students, as we expect, both of first generation and second generation foreign students. See, the median is above, and in general, the distribution of native students dominates the distribution of foreign students, as we expect. This happens also for INVALSI test. So the distribution of native performance is dominating the performance of foreign students, both in Italian and INVALSI. So in both sources, there is like a better performance by Italian native students. But what we are interested in is the comparison between the two sorts of information. So in this graph, I provide some visual evidence of what is called the grading bias. So is the difference in the relative performance between the objective and the subjective performance. We see that controlling for your performance in the blind ranking, so in the ranking of INVALSI test, native students are going to perform better in the grade given by the teacher. This means that if I have the same performance, like on average, of a native and a foreign student in the INVALSI test, on average, the native student is going to be characterized by a better grade in the teacher-assigned evaluation. And this can be shown also statistically. Let's just focus on the first column in which we have the baseline model. We see that controlling for the math score standardized at the class level, the effect of being a foreign student is negative on the grade given by the teacher. The coefficient here is 0.339 for first generation and 0.228 for second generation, and is statistically significant with a p-value less than 1%. Now that we have like some sort of generic evidence of grading bias, we want to build our measure of treatment of grading bias in order to see if this is associated with a specific trend in the future. So I use two different approaches. The first one is to estimate this measure of grading bias of student under evaluation. The basic idea is that I want to compare the score in the blind test, standardized at the class level, with the score in the teacher assigned grade, standardized at the class level, which means that this indicator will take value 0 if my ranking in the teacher and INVALSI assessment is the same, while if I have a positive value, means that I'm gonna receive a better evaluation from this the INVALSI test. So let's say that I am the average guy according to the teacher. If instead I'm not the average guy, but I am I am like a bit better according to INVALSI, then I have a positive value. An alternative specification is instead with average teacher bias. In this case, I compare like the class average of grading bias for foreign students with the class average of grading bias for native students. So this is more a measure pertaining the class, the teacher. The difference between these two measures is first that in the first one you have a measure of the individual under assessment, while in the second you have a measure of the average under assessment of foreign students. Indeed, in the first measure you can have an under assessment also clearly for native students, right? Because my ranking can be different regardless of my background, of course. Although the this measure is higher on average for foreign students, as we saw. But in the second measure, you have like, you are comparing averages. So in this case, is a measure of the entire class and specifically provide information on the average of like the average grading bias of foreign students compared to native ones. So this is the main equation that we want to estimate. The dependent variable is the performance on a future period, which can be the second period of observation if you want to see medium-term effect, or can be the third period of observation if we want to see more like long-term effects. While all the independent variable pertain to the first period of observation. So we control for the performance in the first period, the objective performance, the INVALSI one. Then we have dummy F for foreign background. Then we have our measure of grading bias. We can consider two different perspectives. So the individual under assessment or the average teacher bias, as I was saying before. And then we have this interaction term, which is the most relevant information, right? We want to see the interaction between foreign status and the grading bias. So this is gonna tell us if foreign students are more affected by this grading bias. And then we have a long vector X of many controls. Three main outcomes are considered in this case. The first one is disappearance from the sample. Although here I'm going to skip this and I'm just going to focus on the impact on the future performance in the INVALSI in grade 5 and 8. So the second and the third period that I observe in the data set. This is like one of the first results. In this case, we see the impact of grading bias on medium-term future performance. So the independent variable pertain to the first period, which in this case is 2012. I observed a cohort of students which was at the second grade of primary school. And I want to see the effect on the next period that I observed, which is 3 years later, the second period. I'm going to control for the math score so that I want to keep my measure of objective performance fixed and to see what is the effect of grading bias on future objective performance. I cannot use as dependent the subjective performance because this would be, you know, this couldn't identify really the effect. So let's just focus on the first column. And I want to show that the effect of grading bias is negative and significant, which means that controlling for my performance, if I am under assessed by the teacher, then on average, I'm going to perform worse even in future objective performance. And this is true for both native students and foreign students. In general, foreign students have a less positive educational growth because we see the coefficient of foreign students is negative and significant. What is really interesting here is to see the interaction term between foreign and grading bias. We see that foreign students that are characterized by some sort of underassessment are suffering even more their future performance because here the coefficient is negative and significant. Here the variables are standardized, which means that an unitary increase in the variable leads to around 3% decrease of standard deviation, which is quite significant, I would say. Now let's turn to this other result. In this case, we want to observe the same thing, but with a different approach. So with the average teacher bias. Let's just focus on the first column. We see that, of course, we control for math score and foreign background. Here, the teacher bias has a positive value, but this doesn't translate in a different interpretation of the result. This is just a mechanic effect of the way we constructed the variable, because in this case, we have average teacher bias. So in this case, if I have a positive coefficient, it's just saying us that native students are going to have a premium if they are over-assessed. Because in this case, it's an average measure. So a positive value here means that in the class, on average, the bias is higher for foreign students, which means that for native students, you're going to have a premium. So the grade given by the teacher will be more generous. So you can respond to the self-fulfilling prophecy in the opposite way. So you think that you're good, you're going to invest more in education. While what is really interesting is the interaction term between foreign and teacher bias, which is therefore showing the effect on foreign students. In this case, is negative and significant. The first specification is a standard OLS, and then in the other, I use different specifications. So the second column, we also had a school fix effect. In the third column, it is a multi-level hierarchical model with a mixed effect. So I count in the hierarchical structure for both the class and the school effect. And then I replicate the same model with the addition of a lot set of controls. And we see that if you see the other columns, we just see that although some slight changes in the coefficient, they are quite similar. So the first results are kind of consistent with all specifications. Now I'm going to provide similar evidence, but in this case, the dependent variable is no longer the performance on the second period, but is the performance on the third and last period. So the interpretation is the same, but this is telling us the association between our independent variables and the long-term future performance. In this case, we can just see that interpretation is the same. Let's focus on first column and interaction term between foreign and grading bias. We see that even in this case, the coefficient is negative and significant. This is consistent also when we add our long set of controls. And this is the same table as before, but of course with a different dependent variable pertaining the last period. The interpretation is the same. Let's go to the first column. We see that the average teacher bias has a positive, but not statistically different from zero effect, while the interaction term, so the effect, the impact of teacher bias on foreign students is still negative and significant. And this is quite consistent in the different model specifications. So I think that now I can conclude. So in this research, I'm trying to provide evidence of systematic grading bias against foreign students, but this is not new in the literature. We say that there is a large body of evidence on that. What is kind of new is to try to see that there is really an impact of the experience of grading bias. So the experience of grading bias is associated negatively with future student performance. And this is providing evidence of the so-called self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think it's a big result because it tells us that there are some mechanisms even in grading that can jeopardize the quality of opportunity. So this is something we should be very careful and take that into consideration. Thank you very much for the attention. I'm really looking forward for any question or comments.
Okay. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and perfectly on time. Let's open the floor to questions. Yes. I think you have to wait for the mic.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it. I am actually working on the same stuff, but I'm focusing on gender bias in grading. So I have one question. Oh no, my God. That regards, why did you focus only on math? Since we know from the literature that actually it could be that in language, the grading bias works the other way around. So teachers are more likely to help actually immigrant students since they struggle more when when they need to learn the language Italian. So teachers tend to give them a premium in terms of grades. So I was wondering why you focus just on math. I think that focusing on language could be also really interesting. And the other thing that I'm struggling with actually with my research too is the fact that actually grade and INVALSI test score are really different measures and they capture different things. So INVALSI test score measures ability, if we want, subject-specific competencies, while grades by definition captures a lot of other stuff. So I'm afraid you're seeing the effect of all the other stuff that grade captures. For example, the behavior of students in classroom or the way in which they behave with teacher. So I don't think you're controlling for this kind of stuff. I know you are not because there's not such information in the INVALSI test. So I was wondering whether the effect that you see, it could be either then grading bias, could be also all these other characteristics that students show that teachers tend to evaluate when giving grades and that are directly affecting actual competencies later on in time. So I'm not sure you can disentangle these two things. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Okay. No, thank you very much for the question. They're two very key questions. The first one, the reason I choose math instead of Italian was a bit related to also the second one. So some people are a bit concerned that the Italian comparison can be even more affected by the problem you were mentioning in the second question. So I'm gonna include also the analysis with Italian, but some people believe that the comparison between the two information regarding math is a bit more reliable, in the sense that they say that usually Italian can take more into consideration other sort of information like behavior, this kind of thing. While in math, on average, this is less associated with that. But yeah, I will consider also including Italian, although I'm not really sure what are the feedback that I'm going to have in that sense. Regarding the second question, this is the key issue. So it's also the common concern that is present in this literature, right? Because you want to estimate this sort of grading bias. What can you do? You compare a subjective with an objective performance, and there is always this concern about okay, but what are we really measuring? Are we measuring grading bias, or just that maybe foreign students perform better in that kind of test for some reason? I think I can put it in two different ways. One is let's keep the interpretation that I give to results, and we have to just think that our measure of grading bias is not capturing only grading bias, but is a proxy of grading bias. I think it's a good one because like Alesina and others, they show that even controlling for behavior and other information is still associated with stereotypes. So it's not the best the best measure, but at least is a good proxy. So you can think of it as some way dirty proxy, but with a on average with a good association. The second way you can see the results is if you say, no, I don't believe the identification strategy because these are measuring two different things. And even if you control for behavior and other things, then they are going to be different. Then, yeah, you have to change the interpretation. In this sense, it will not be no longer be the effect of grading bias as we think about it, like in terms of stereotypes, this kind of stereotype like statistical discrimination, but it will be instead we have to think about it as like comparison of two different things, in which therefore teacher is not really assessing you for your competence, but for something different. And even controlling for this, if you can, because in some cases you can, then this has an impact on you. So in principle, the teacher should give you the grade based on your objective performance. If this doesn't happen, because it takes into account also other things, then you're going to interpret it as a different, like an impact of still a different assessment, but because it's not driven by stereotypes, but it's driven by other things. But still is it tell you an impact of a different grade based on some sort of other observable. Sorry if it was a bit long, but okay.
Any other question? Anybody from Zoom? Okay, if there's nobody, I wanted to make one comment and one question. So the comment is that, well, first of all, I like this paper, even if this, as Ilaria Lievore pointed out, there are some concerns about the interpretation. And I think that these concerns have to be taken seriously into account also because the facts that you show are pretty strong. So if we take them at face value, in one of your specification, grading bias has an impact of 0.2 standard deviations, which is a huge effect. So it depends a lot on how you handle this this conclusion, also because it was quite precisely estimated, if I remember correctly. And relating to this, I have also a comment in the direction of what you do, because I was working also on grading bias some years ago, and one thing that caused the main objection to our work, it was that in the INVALSI data you have mid-term grades. And the problem is that mid-term grades, there were not only other researchers, but especially teachers that pointed out correctly that grades could be given, can be used in a strategic way in order to stimulate a reaction from the students. So there are some, and but the interesting thing is that it is not obvious how the teachers use this kind of tool, because there are some teachers that say, I want to give the students a premium, so a positive feedback in order to stimulate them to make even better, so I give them a higher grade. Others instead are saying, I give them a lower grade in order to stimulate them. And probably this has to do also with the knowledge that the teacher have of the student and of the way in which his or her experience suggests to do with students with particular struggles, for instance. So, but and this is a problem in cross-section designs. While in a longitudinal design, stating all the cautions that the comment of Ilaria Lievore put on the plate, they somehow take some strengths out of this comment, because you say, if it was only something that it is used strategically, then we should not observe any long-term problem, while you are actually showing the opposite. And as concerned the question instead, but that's my fault for sure, I do not understand the difference between the tables. So in one table, the first models about individual discrimination, in reality, what the take-home message that I had, it was that grading discrimination is very strong on future performance, but in reality, my migratory background gradient was very low. So it was 0.02, which is somehow negligible as compared to the 0.25 that has on the general population. So while in the second set of tables, the one that about average teaching grade grading bias, we saw that the whole negative effect was concentrated on the interaction between grading bias and foreign student. So, and I have to admit that this change was not at all obvious to me, but probably that's my fault. And but before you answer, just one other comment relating to your analysis. You have the statistical power to split the foreign population into two components, because I guess that they behave differently.
Yeah, well,
that's it.
Okay.
So,
thank you. Like, they were all very interesting comments. I'll try to address all of them. So the first is was about the idea that in a way teachers are already aware of this potential self-fulfilling prophecy, but in a specific here, right? Yeah, of course, it's not easy to disentangle what part of the grade is given by your performance and what instead by these other criteria. But I think it's very interesting to take into account also maybe in the discussion of the paper, like if teachers believe that they can affect the performance of students based on their signal, then we should see different results, right? So yeah, I think I didn't comment that, but I think it's an interesting perspective. Then the second comment was on the last one was on the tables, yeah. Right? The second. No, it was just a comment. Okay. So about the tables, maybe it's better if I come back to them. Okay. So you say that in this case, you are comparing this with this one, right? Yeah. Okay. And you say that in this case, the grading bias is negative, and also the interaction term is negative, and in this sense, instead, it's positive and negative. And you say that this is a bit counterintuitive, or am I getting it right?
Yeah, but also what I get from this table, but again, probably I missed some point, is that here the big issue is grading bias. Excellent. With more or less a negligible effect on foreign students, while in the other table, it is completely on the shoulders of foreign students. That's the issue.
Well, actually, yeah, I can answer you, I think, in two ways that complement each other. So the first one is a bit mechanic in the sense that the difference between the two measures, like it also is an average, right? So also in a way I have to a bit restrict the sample. I'm gonna explain this in the sense that while in the first table we're going to see all individuals, like in the second, instead, I need to have some sort of heterogeneity in the background of the students in the class, which means that now I remember also the other comment about the difference between first generation, second generation students, right? Be aware that in the first table we can show this difference, and they behave like with different. They have a bit different coefficient, but the interpretation is similar. So now I don't remember exactly the size, but in both cases, the interpretation is similar. One, I don't remember if first or second generation foreign students is affected a bit more than the other. While in the second table, you cannot exploit this difference because you need, in this case, you have the classes in which you have a population of native students and of foreign students. And instead, the classes where you have both, like at the same time, native, first generation, foreign students, and you can compute the average of all of them is smaller. So this will create an issue of like different samples. So in the second table, I just have the classes where I have these two different subpopulations that can be identified. And regarding the different, I think this explains a bit the different results, but I'm gonna to look at even more like about this the different size that you were mentioning.
Well, because it completely changes the interpretation. So, but there are two different measures, but looking at the tables, I have a completely different idea of the phenomenon. In one case, it is discrimination against a specific group or well, discrimination or whatever we are measuring on a specific group. And in the other case, the interpretation is quite different. I would conclude, if there is no one else, with just a comment on what you just said, because the fact that first generation and second generation students have a very similar coefficient in the first table is itself a result that should be highlighted. Because on the one hand, you can argue that some of them maybe arrived in Italy or they have much stronger ties with their original culture that can be translated into a different behavior from the teachers based on I don't know, whatever the teacher considered to be important, like class disruptions or difficulty to engage in a relationship with somebody with a background very different from the one of the teacher. But second generation students are Italian, actually, are Italians. And so the signal that they give is their surname, is the color of the skin. It's in my opinion something that should be investigated, but because they're not the same type of population. And yes, with this, I would thank you very much for this very relevant and interesting presentation. And I would pass the floor to the second presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.